Hey, how's it going everybody? My name is Stevie Wonderkid, and today I'm going to be showing you guys the absolute best drift tune or drift setup in Grand Theft Auto 5 Online. So in this video, we're going to be going through each customization option available to you guys in Los Santos Customs or Benny's depending on the car, so that way you guys know exactly what modifications that you can and can't have if you want to have the best possible chances of drifting your car. So before I get started with everything, there's a couple notes that I want to make, and the first involves the testing footage that you guys see in this video. So this footage was included to help you guys better see and understand the modifications that will affect a car's driftability. Now, a majority of this footage does showcase the Schwarzer, but this was for the sake of keeping it consistent throughout the video. I also do show some testing results from some other popular drift cars throughout the video as well, but in reality though, I did a ton of testing to evaluate each part's effectiveness on a variety of cars, not just those shown in the video. For the sake of keeping the video to a decent length, a lot of what I'm going to be explaining in depth is a summary of the testing that I've done, but if you guys want to find more information about the test that I did, as well as the cars that I chose to test, that will all be in the description below. I also want to make a quick note about the testing footage that you guys see in this video. This was recorded using single player mods on PC, but for the sole purpose of quickly testing different parts, cars, and overall drift setups, so that way it wouldn't take up a lot of time and money. It was simply for convenience. Absolutely no handling mods were used in the testing for this video. So if you guys are eager to learn more about how to drift in GTA 5 without any sort of handling mods, and you also want to know more about the cars in GTA 5 that are actually capable of drifting properly, I'd highly recommend that you guys go and check out my best cars for drifting in 2020 video, which I will have linked in the card at the top right hand corner of the screen right now, and I will also have it in the description down below. And this video not only gives you guys a pretty basic drifting tutorial to get you started, but it will also show at least 30 proven and capable drift cars across a variety of skill levels that you can use for drifting within GTA 5. I've even used some of the cars that I mentioned in that video to test different drift setups for this video, so I do think it will be helpful for you guys to check out that video at some point. Alright, so now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's now head into Los Santos Customs and go through every part to show you guys what you need for your drift car. Now in this video, I will be setting up the benefactor Schwarzer for drifting because setting this car up is extremely easy to do and the car itself is great for beginner drifters. However, I will leave some example drift tunes for the Schwarzer and some other cars at the end of the video if you guys want to reference those. And also really quickly, I do want to let you guys know that I am going through these modifications out of order. However, I did this so that way I could show each part in order of its importance. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, so to start off, there are two main modifications that you should stay away from for most of your drift builds, the first one being bulletproof tires. Now it is extremely important that for most, if not all of your drift builds, that you do not do the bulletproof tire upgrade, because doing this will prevent you from being able to stance your car. Now I talk more about stancing in my best drift cars of 2020 video, but to put it simply, this is the main damage mechanic within GTA 5 that allows you to forcefully damage your car's suspension, resulting in a significant decrease in grip and overall handling abilities, which is obviously what we want for drifting. It's pretty much what enables most cars to drift. Now, for whatever reason, adding bulletproof tires will prevent you from being able to exploit this damage mechanic, so by default, you should leave bulletproof tires off of most of your drift builds. An important note is that if you've already applied the bulletproof tire upgrade to your car, unfortunately, the only way to remove this is through mods or by selling and repurchasing the car entirely. However, there are some cars that cannot be stanced in the first place, which I'm showing on the screen right now. So specifically for these cars, bulletproof tires actually won't matter. But for most other drift cars, especially the more popular ones like the Schwarzer as I'm showing in this video, these cars cannot have the bulletproof tire upgrade. And the next modification to stay away from is a spoiler upgrade, because absolutely any spoiler upgrade other than what is on the car in its stock form will serve to add traction to the car and will ultimately make it harder to drift. Now I know that on some cars you actually have the option to remove the spoiler, but that still technically counts as a spoiler upgrade and will still add traction even though it really makes no sense. Now for some of the more powerful and or slidey cars, a spoiler might end up helping, but this is only in a couple rare cases that I'll talk about later on. Generally speaking, for most of your drift builds, it's best to keep the spoiler off to minimize grip and thus maximize driftability. Alright, so now we know that the two main modifications to stay away from are bulletproof tires and spoilers, and I wanted to get those out of the way first just to prevent any future headache. So now we're going to get into the necessary mods that you should have for all of your drift builds. Alright, first off is the engine upgrade, which is in my opinion the most important modification for properly setting up a drift car, mainly because of the fact that increased power output is going to make it easier for any car to spin its wheels and ultimately drift. So no matter what skill level you are with drifting, no matter what speed you plan on drifting at, I would upgrade the engine before you do anything else to your car. Alright, the next most important upgrade to do is the turbo upgrade, because this is another really important power modification that, in combination with the engine upgrade, is going to make the car much easier to drift because of the increased power output. I would prioritize the engine upgrade over the turbo upgrade, maybe if you're running out of money and you only have one or the other unlocked, but for the absolute best chances of drifting, you are going to want to do both upgrades. They're going to help your drifting out a ton. Next up is the suspension level. Now this is an interesting upgrade because more often than not, the suspension upgrade that you go for is going to be dictated by the car you're trying to set up for drifting. Keep in mind too that the suspension upgrades that we're doing now in Los Santos Customs or in Benny's, depending on the car, is going to be different from any sort of height difference you'll notice when you stance your car. So generally speaking, the lower the car's suspension is, the slidier it is going to be. In all the cases that I tested for this video, a lower suspension made initiating, maintaining, and transitioning in drifts slightly easier to do because there was less body roll to account for. However, this increased driftability comes at a cost of reduced steering response, which makes the process of counter steering a little bit more difficult to do. So as you guys will see on the screen, the lower the suspension is, the easier it is for a car's rear end to kick out, ultimately leading to me spinning out. On the other hand, when the car's suspension is higher, the car has less of a tendency to kick out and will be slightly easier to countersteer with. However, at the same time, you will need to drive the car more aggressively to account for that higher center of mass and increase body roll. My best advice to you guys is to find a balance between overall slidiness and steering response. So what this means is that for those lighter weight, underpowered vehicles, you should opt for the lowest suspension level possible to maximize the car's drifting potential, while for those heavier or more powerful vehicles, you should opt for a slightly higher suspension level so that way you have some degree of car control as you're drifting. Alright, last but not least is the transmission upgrade. Now whether you choose to upgrade the transmission or not is pretty much down to your skill level and what kind of drifting you'd like to do. So generally, for beginner drifters who are going to be doing single gear drifts and drifting at lower speeds, you should leave the transmission stock, because with the stock transmission, it's going to take longer to upshift, and this delay between shifts is going to allow you to make the most of that first gear wheel spin without worrying about the transmission shifting up and your car falling out of power and killing the drift. On the other hand, for more highly skilled drifters who are aiming to master higher speed drifts using the mid-drive speed boost, I would recommend upgrading the transmission as much as possible. Having the transmission upgraded will increase the car's responsiveness in longer drifts, meaning that there's going to be less lag when you're engaging and re-engaging the mid-drive speed boost, ultimately allowing you to drift more consistently at higher speeds without risk of the car bogging down and killing the drift. So simply put, for lower skilled drifters who are going to be relying a lot on the handbrake and just doing handbrake taps and single gear drifts, keep the transmission stock. For higher skill, higher speed drifting, do the transmission upgrade. So believe it or not guys, these are really the only major modifications you're going to need to consider for most drift builds, and these are all going to serve to maximize your car's driftability after you stance it. Now in most cases, choosing a reliable and a capable drift car and applying all of the modifications that I just discussed is going to be an adequate setup for most drifters, and really is just going to be a set and forget thing. It won't require a ton of additional fine tuning. But now for the sake of providing just a little bit more detail, I'm going to be going through the rest of the modifications in Los Santos Customs that we didn't already cover. Now these modifications include aesthetic upgrades like bumpers, wheels, exhaust, roll cages, skirts, things like that, in addition to the other upgrades we didn't touch on like armor upgrades and brakes. Now many of these choices are going to be down to your own personal preference, but in some cases might also vary depending on your skill level and the car that you choose to set up for drifting. Now before I start going through the rest of these modifications, I do want to point out that these parts will not have a drastic effect on a car's ability to drift. None of the parts that I'm going to be going through in a minute will make or break a car's driftability. The parts that I mentioned previously, combined with enough practice and seat time in the car that you've chosen to set up, will ultimately have the most influence on you and your car's ability to drift. The parts that I'll be talking about now have more nuanced differences, but might still help you when you're setting up various other cars depending on their drifting capabilities and your experience as well. I also want to credit Bruffy1322, Chili, and a few other members of the GTA 5 racing community for providing a ton of testing information for almost every single available car modification to evaluate the effects that they all have, and all of the relevant links to these resources are going to be in the description below in case you guys are interested in reading any further. So with that said, let's now go through the rest of these modifications. First off are armor upgrades. Now armor upgrades have absolutely no effect on a car's performance and thus don't affect a car's driftability directly, so whether or not you choose to do the armor upgrade is up to you. Generally speaking, adding armor is going to make a car harder to stance, because the stronger the car is, the more time and ammo you're going to need to spend shooting either the wheels or the quarter panels to properly stance your car before you start to drift. Many drift cars, when they are stanced, tend to be very sensitive to damage, damage, meaning that armor might help slightly in reducing the adverse handling effects that come from collisions. However, for the sake of cost and because they don't really make a massive difference, I tend to leave armor off of all of my drift builds. Next up are brake upgrades. Now, any brake upgrade will rarely affect a car's driftability because they're not used very often and they have absolutely no effect on the strength of the handbrake. Now, for any higher skilled drifter who wants to take on extremely high angle drifts, reverse entries, 360-degree entries, things like that, I would actually recommend leaving the brakes stock. Otherwise, they're going to slow the car down too much and kill your drift if you rely on left foot braking to do these more complex drifts. And because of this, and also to save money, for most of my drift builds I leave the brake stock, but if you want to use your car for more than just drifting, feel free to do the brake upgrade if you'd like. So now we have bumpers, and here's where I'm going to talk pretty much about all of the other aesthetic upgrades available in Los Santos Customs or Benny's. These don't just include bumpers, but also other exterior additions like fenders, roll cages, hoods, grills, skirts, roofs, exhausts, neon lights, and others. So as has been concluded by the GTA 5 racing community, depending on where you apply an aesthetic modification to a car will serve to shift the position of the car's center of mass towards where you applied that modification. So for example, if you have a lot of rear biased aesthetic upgrades like a rear bumper upgrade, a different exhaust, or rear mounted neon lights, these will all serve to shift the center of mass towards the rear of the car, making the car generally more planted and prone to understeer. Now on the other hand, front biased aesthetic upgrades like front bumpers, grills, hoods, fenders, front mounted neon lights, these will all serve to shift the center of mass slightly towards the front of the car, creating more of a tendency for the car to oversteer. So this is what has been generally concluded and accepted by the GTA 5 racing community. However, for a majority of the testing that I did in this video, I noticed pretty much no difference from applying certain combinations of exterior parts to the cars that I chose to test. I think the main reason for this is because when you stance a car in GTA 5, you change its handling so massively to the point that you really wouldn't notice any sort of handling effects that would have been caused by applying a certain combination of exterior upgrades. However, I don't want to ignore the possibility that aesthetic upgrades might affect a car's driftability slightly by changing the position of the car's center of mass. So with that in mind, if you guys do want to go to this level of detail for your drift builds, what you can do is keep the exterior of your car entirely stock or try to balance out aesthetic modifications across the front, rear, and middle of the car so that way you aren't drastically changing the position of the car's center of mass. And also going for these full exterior modifications or doing aesthetic upgrades around the middle of the car like roll cages, skirts, roofs, mid-mounted neon lights, and others, these might also help to reduce body roll for some cars, which can increase overall car control. Alternatively, if a car is more underpowered and generally harder to drift, it might help to bias the aesthetic upgrades towards the front of the car to reduce grip on the rear wheels to make the car easier to slide. And for higher powered, higher speed drift cars, you can opt to bias the aesthetic upgrades towards the rear of the car to add a little bit more control during those higher speed drifts. So as I said before, I didn't notice any massive differences from these exterior upgrades. However, based on what the GTA 5 racing community has said, there could be a possibility that these mods do make a difference. So if you guys test these out and notice any differences, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what your guys' experiences are. Alright, so the next few modifications in Los Santos Customs have no effect on our car's driftability at all, and these include explosives, horns, headlights, license plates, and respray colors. And next up are wheel and tire upgrades. Now this is actually a pretty hot topic when it comes to setting up a drift car in GTA 5, and there's currently a lot of debate in the community about which wheel type is the most slippery. However, throughout all of the testing that I did on various cars with every single tire type, I actually didn't notice much of a change in handling or overall driftability at all. And I think this can mainly be attributed to the fact that when you stance a car in GTA 5, you change its handling so drastically to the point that you really wouldn't notice any major differences caused by a certain wheel or tire upgrade. So at least based on the testing that I did for this video, I think it's safe to say that any wheel and tire choice will work. Alright, so as you guys can see, this is some of the other tire testing data that I collected, because I know this is all a pretty big gray area, but as you guys can see, the handling of the cars really isn't that noticeably different, and I know that my lines weren't perfect, but still all tire types were pretty equally consistent in terms of their performance. However, the racing community does agree that muscle tires are more slidey than any other tire type, so if you want to, you can choose those for the highest chances of driftability. On the other hand, I recommend staying away from off-road wheels or tires because they do provide the most grip over bumpy surfaces, and this can create some handling inconsistencies, especially during street drifting. Now, besides bulletproof tires, which we talked about earlier, other tire-related modifications like custom tires, tire letters on street wheels, and tire smoke have no effect on driftability, and the same thing goes for window tints, which also have no effect on a car's driftability. Alright guys, so I know that this video has gone on pretty long already, and it's also gone really in depth with a lot of what I've been talking about, but I did want to make sure that you guys knew the effects that most, if not all of these available modifications have on a car's overall driftability. So hopefully now you guys are going to be able to set up most cars for drifting using a combination of the major or required parts that I talked about earlier in the video, combined with some of the more minor parts that I just talked about. And to kind of give you guys a foundation to work with when you're setting up pretty much any drift car, I have the basic drift tune that I pretty much talked about earlier in the video on the screen right now, and I also will show you guys some beginner and expert drift tunes for the Bravado Banshee 900R, the Benefactor Schwarzer, and the Dubauchi Rapid GT. Alright, so I know that this video overall was pretty long and technical, however, I did want to make sure I went through everything to make sure you guys were fully equipped to set up your cars for drifting, and I also hope that the example drift tunes that I showed for some of the more popular drift cars kind of make things a little bit easier to understand. But with that said, that is pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in this video, but as always, if you guys have any further questions, feel free to leave them in a comment down below, and I will do my best to answer them. Also, feel free to drop a like on the video if you enjoyed, in addition to any feedback or questions in the comments down below, and also consider subscribing to the channel for more GTA 5 drifting content like this. But anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed the video once again, and I hope you all have a great new year, and I will see you guys in the next video.